Welcome, Ring of Honor fans. It is our distinct pleasure to bring to you not only 18 years of great professional wrestling, the best professional wrestling on the planet, but tonight, a very important topic. It is the first of many ROH Roundtables, and tonight we're going to be discussing Black Lives Matter, police brutality, and what it means to be black in professional wrestling, race and racism in the sport that we love. My name is Ian Riccaboni. It's been my pleasure to be the host of Ring of Honor Wrestling for the last 3.5 years and to be colleagues with the esteemed wrestlers on this panel here tonight for the greater part of the last 6. And tonight we hope to challenge preconceived notions. We hope to engage in conversation and to open minds and to start a dialogue. We encourage you to use the hashtag ROH Roundtable to continue the conversation beyond what is happening here tonight. Now tonight, it is my pleasure to be joined by my colleague on ROH Wrestling, Caprice Coleman. Caprice, thank you for joining us here tonight.
Man, I'm excited to be here.
We also have former Ring of Honor World Television Champion, Shane Taylor. Shane, thanks so much for being with us. And also joining us, former Ring of Honor World Television Champion, former World Tag Team Champion, Kenny King. We have one half of the World Tag Team Champions, Jonathan Gresham. And we are also joined by his tag team partner, one half of the World Tag Team Champions, the man known as the franchise of Ring of Honor, Jay Lethal. So we're going to waste no time. We're going to jump right into it. We value your time, and there is a lot to discuss. And it's not lost on me that as the announcer and broadcaster for Ring of Honor, I am a white man that's had to confront some uncomfortable truths. And we hope through this discussion that I have the privilege to be a part of with some of the best wrestlers in the world that we can open some minds and enlighten some souls here today. So I'm going to start things off. We'll take you back to May.
The killing of George Floyd. It was a scene broadcast on Twitter videos, Facebook videos, and it was one of many killings of a black man by police that have been captured and shared on social media.
But something about this one felt different. And it reignited peaceful protests all across the United States that continue to this day, both East Coast, West Coast, the American South, the American Midwest, and more. I'm going to kick it to Caprice. Caprice, you have children. How have you posed this to your children? How are you explaining to your children what is going on in the world right now?
Well, it's funny you asked me because they approached me with it about what's going on. And even my son is 15 years old, and he plays video games a lot, but he likes to go outside a lot too. And it almost came up to a discussion to where it was like, Chase, why aren't you going outside? I don't want to get killed. Like, that's real, to him, because my son turns 16 in September. And for a lot of people, that's cool. But in Black America, he goes from being a child to being an adult, and he's no longer looked at as a little kid, and so that's real to him. And of course, I think every Black household goes over the talk with their children of how to act if you're pulled over by a cop or confronted by a cop with your friends or whatever like that, saying, be respectful, don't get loud. Know your rights, but don't try to make a big deal because the cop's going to level up, and your main thing is to make it home safe, and we have this talk with them, and we've had it more than once because, as time goes on, things change. And then with this George Floyd thing, and it's way more than Floyd, but with that type of thing hitting, it made it more prevalent. To where he sees it more as real to him, because a lot of the stuff that was going on in the news, a lot of it happened not too far. We live right in the heart of Charlotte. So while it was going on in the news, we were able to hear it and drive right to it ourselves.
And with this instance, you mentioned, the names go on and on. Trayvon Martin.
His killing in 2013 is what sparked the Black Lives Matter movement.
Jay, we've never really discussed issues like this together. We've shared a lot of meals. We've traveled the roads a little bit. Why do you think this one was different? Why do you think George Floyd ignited this feeling or touched a nerve among so many people?
Well, the saddest part to me is not that this one has sparked and touched everybody's hearts or tugged at something to make them say there's a time for a change. The saddest part to me is thinking about how many times that this has happened and it didn't get recorded, when someone didn't have their cell phone out. And, to touch on something Caprice said, I can clearly remember my dad teaching me what to do when I got pulled over, or if I ever got pulled over. And some of the things he told me, he said, and it's a lot of things that he said, I don't see other people doing those things when they get pulled over, mainly non-African Americans, even in, whether it's in movies, TVs, or in real life. I got to roll the windows down. I got to turn on every light in the car to make sure everything is visible. I got to keep my hands way up high on the steering wheel. I got to look straight, and I don't talk back. I can clearly remember him going through those things, and how painful must that have been for him to have to tell me those things. When you ask Caprice, how did you tell your kids about what's going on? It hurts my heart. I always thought that I wanted kids, but in this instance, and I know several other guys here do have children, but in this instance, I'm actually happy that I don't have kids. That's not a conversation that I would want to have with anybody, let alone my own children. But yeah, it really sucks, and it bothers me that it's only getting traction now, and I'm glad it is. But just thinking about all the people and all the times that this stuff happened and no one was there to record it or say anything, it's just a little sad.
I think that speaks to a lot of the systemic racism that occurs not only with police brutality, but among many professions, almost all professions, I'd argue. Kenny, you and I are both of about the same age. When we were growing up, Rodney King was the first instance of police brutality that I remember being broadcast. That's when my parents really had the first discussion with me that people of color were treated differently. And that's when it hit home with me. Was there an instance where with your daughter, or you experiencing this right now, this one feels different? The protests, the marches, they're continuing. With Rodney King, it felt like it was Los Angeles, it was the West Coast, and then it was over. But it feels like he's mobilizing right now.
There's a man named James Baldwin who's a very brilliant scholar who said something that I've never really been able to once I heard it, I've never been able to unhear it. And the quote is, to be black and to be relatively conscious in America is to walk around in a state of unconscious rage, right? And I hope I didn't butcher that. I probably did. But basically what the quote is saying is if you're black in this country and you are conscious of what's really going on, you live in a state of low key rage, right? That you sort of have to kind of learn how to deal with, and so I think this is what you're seeing, right? I've been doing, during the quarantine, it's been a lot of time to do a lot of watching things, and I've been watching a lot of documentaries, and man, history doesn't do anything but repeat itself. So you go back and you watch in the 70s with the Watts riots, and then you go back and you see all these different riots and all these different protests, and they all seem to none of them just materialize out of nowhere, right? There's always a collective this collective series of events that leads up to the pot bubbling over. And I think that this is what you see in the last 20, because we've been alive. Rodney King's what we know, but before that was LA riots, and then 4 years ago we're talking about this in Ferguson. So this happens every couple of years because nothing, we talk about it, we get some cute slogans, some people kind of a few people get on board, but there's no real change. There's nothing that really happens. And just to kind of corroborate what everybody's saying, every one of us grew up in completely different areas of this country. Every one of us grew up with completely different parents, and each one of us can recite the talk basically verbatim, you know, exactly what Jay was saying. Hey, keep your mouth shut, turn the lights on, put your hands at 10 and 2. And all of us know this, and we all heard this in different places of the country. But if you're a black man in this country, and you're somewhere, your parents, your elders, they taught you how to stay alive in a certain age because of how you're perceived. So I think that what we're seeing now is just, again, it's bubbling under the surface, and it just continues to bubble over because the burner's pot's never taken off the burner, and this is kind of what we're seeing.
Thank you, Kenny. Shane, you've spoken a lot of truth to power. You know, there's the expression that what we see as a wrestler on television is an extension of the man themselves. And we've talked about your background, how you grew up, your circumstances, and this is the loaded question. So please forgive me from my frame of reference. How complicated is the relationship with police for Black Americans?
Man, here's the thing, because despite what a lot of people may think, Black people don't enjoy nor promote criminality more than any other group of people. It's just in a lot of things, in a lot of places, you are fighting for survival. So the same people, the same murderers that get out of jail, they don't move to the suburbs. They move next to us. We don't have, you know, and like Chuck said in an interview, we don't have the flak jackets and the riot gear and all the things that the police use to combat them do we have. So we just have to learn how to deal with it, right? But when you're in situations where you're fighting for survival, your morals tend to change. And I can see from where I was growing up and the decisions that I made then versus where I'm at and the decisions that I make now, how big that gap is. And when it comes to police, and like a lot of people touched on, not only as a Black person in America, because I don't want to just, you know, say it's black men, but women too, you are taught to grow up very fast. You are put in an adult world very quick. And what that does is it makes our children at some age, they are no longer children, now they're threats. And when people perceive threat, that's why their bias goes up, that's why anger goes up. That's why you have these situations that tend to spiral out of control only with us, not really with any other group. Because when people don't know the culture and really don't know the culture, and all they see is what they saw in World Star or what they see in TV, in music, and in movies, that's what their frame of reference is. So then when they go and they confront someone, they don't see Shane Taylor. They don't see father of two. They don't see a guy that's busted his ass to, you know, to end cycles of poverty in his family and in his community. They see the last image of whatever Black guy they saw on TV, you know. So that presents its own set of problems when you're dealing with how to deal with these situations and what we need to do going forward.
And to jump on that, Shane, I have some statistics from the Department of Justice that really highlight your claims. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, part of the U.S. Department of Justice, you're 5.8 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're Black. In 2013, there were more Black men incarcerated in the United States than the total incarcerated individuals in India, Argentina, Canada, Lebanon, Japan, Germany, Finland, Israel, and England combined. That's a pool of potentially 19 million African Americans in the United States versus 1.6 billion people in those countries combined. And prison populations have nearly quadrupled since 1980, and it's been attributed to the war on drugs and mandatory sentencing. As of 2001, it was anticipated that 1 in 3 Black boys that were born that year would serve jail time, although by 2013, 49% of Black men had been incarcerated by the age of 23. So this is an issue that I had not been aware of in terms of the gravity, in terms of the weight, in terms of the discrimination, in terms of what was happening until this was brought to light. John, let's go to you. How have you perceived this unfolding? it's an issue that, you know, for a lot of fans out there, I think this movement with the unfortunate, the tragedy, the murder of George Floyd, I think has opened a lot of eyes.
I think it's opened a lot of eyes recently. I think some guys touched on it before, is that currently we have social media, we have cameras everywhere. And a few years ago, that wasn't the case when these things were going on. I remember when I saw it for the first time, I think it was maybe a day before, like, everything started to really, like, you know, explode with it. And I sat in my bed just disgusted. I knew what the outcome was going to be before I even finished the video. And I don't know, I felt nauseous and everything. And it's just something that I really hate that it had to go this far, but I'm happy that we're here at this point, and more, our voices are being heard more by more people that for some reason weren't listening before. It's really sad because also, like the other guys that spoke about, I was very sheltered when I was coming up. So my mom would explain these things to me, and sometimes I would, like, kind of blow these things off because she never told me the raw truth about why she was teaching me these things. I kind of had to come into the realization of it later on when I started my wrestling career, and I was traveling with people that weren't Black that were actually smartening me up to being pulled over with them. And they were like, hey man, they singled me out. And I was like 14 or 15 around this time. So, like, I should know these things, but I was never exposed to them because I lived in a all Black community. We all, like, just took care of each other. I never really ran into the cop situation. So, like, me growing up, I was just oblivious to these things. So when it came to that point, I remember being singled out. I remember it being a trip, St. Louis. I was with a group of guys called the Hooligans, and a police officer actually singled me out in the carload of a group of white guys, and I was in the back seat, and he singled me out. And like, that's when everything really started to sink in that, you know, I am being treated different because of what I look like and who I am. So for me, I'm just really pleased to see that more people of different upbringings are actually concerned about this and pushing this movement.
No, I am too, and I think the big thing is that, you know, there have been wrestler Shane. I have to commend you. You've been very vocal in the front lines about representation in wrestling. Yourself, Caprice, and Kenny were in a group called Rebellion, where you spoke about a lot of these things before it was hip to speak about these things, and it's, you know, it's refreshing to me that, you know, we have that to look back on, but there is some action to be taken. And one of the things that I wanted to do was incorporate some of the fan questions. For the ROH Roundtables, we have an anonymous Google form. For this one, we have a ton of thought-provoking questions, and I'm going to piggyback off of Gresh's last question there. And I'll throw this out to the group so anybody that wants to jump in can jump in. The question reads, have you ever felt or experienced racial injustice in professional wrestling and kept your mouth shut because you were afraid that you would lose your job or position in the company that you were working for? Can you please share the story? Caprice, you had a visual reaction to that.
I guess I have to start off by saying I've been in this sport for well over 20 years. Okay, and so I remember when starting in this sport, man, there's so much I can say. I'm gonna narrow it down like this. I remember starting in this sport to where I was young, I was cocky, I was well built, and I had a mouth on me, you know. And those things, if you put that on somebody else, it's $1 million. With me, it was, you don't know your place, stay in your place. And there were a lot of times to where my mouth got me in trouble, you know, to where I spoke when I shouldn't have spoken. And I got to the point, even to now, and some people on this panel can even attest to, I would come to them and say something because I've been reprimanded so much because of that, that I check with people before I speak about something. Or if I feel a certain way, am I reaching too far on this, or is this the way this is? Should I say something? And now times have changed for a lot of people. But with me being in this sport for 20 years, I definitely know plenty of times to where I felt that I needed to say something, and I kept my mouth shut because in my head I was supposed to be happy to have a job anyway.
Shane, Jay, anything?
I mean, I tried it myself because my wife's giving the baby a bath in the background. I didn't want that to be on the thing, but it's dad life. You know what I mean? To piggyback off that too, I've been in situations where that's come up. For me though, the way I grew up, I'm a guy that until recently, was broke. Now I have money. You know what I mean? So not having it isn't really an issue of mine. Fearing some sort of reprimand or or condemnation for me speaking my mind isn't a thought to me. I'm going to go directly to who I have a problem with, and that's the situation that we're going to have. Because to me, it's a matter of right and wrong. If you're wrong about something and it wronged me or people that I know, I'm going to bring it to your attention. So there's going to be racial issues in this sport based on, again, misinformation, a lack of understanding of the culture itself, a lack of understanding of the people involved, and the goal of marketing, because a lot of this boils down to cash too. When you brought up those crime stats, right? Crime stats tell one side of the story, but they don't talk about the bigger picture, which is economics. It's easier to convict poor people. It's easier for them not to fight the cases. It's easier, to give them longer sentences. The lawyers aren't going to fight as hard. The public defenders that they have are just going to tell them to plead guilty so they get paid and they go to jail, and it's the same cycle. It provides cheap labor for companies because they'll use prison labor as opposed to paying a factory worker $15 an hour. There's a whole system of how this stuff works and how it benefits, but people want to act like they don't see it or they don't understand it, and in wrestling, just going off what Capri said, those very same attributes that you would describe a champion to have, when you look at the Ric Flairs, when you look at the guys like that, those should be coveted attributes. Those should be coveted things that you go, hey, we have a star on our hands, but you're relegated to, hey, this isn't your spot. You're not supposed to say these things. You're not supposed to dance. You're not supposed to be cocky. You're not supposed to, why would you not be? When you close your eyes and you imagine what a champion looks like in your head in professional wrestling, the image that you get, it isn't one of us. And it should be. When you have a guy like Jay who's sitting here, who's one of the greatest to ever do this ever, and this is not just blood blowing smoke, that's his resume speaks for itself. That should be what the image of a champion is. The ability for anybody to be able to have that is what we're fighting for, and it not just be relegated to a certain field.
Sorry, Kenny. Mine will be quick, just because I don't know what you're going to say, but to answer Ian's question, from my personal experience, there are a few of us that do get lucky. I actually have never been in a situation where I thought something either positive or negative was happening to me because of the color of my skin, and for someone to be in that position and think that they can't or shouldn't say anything or else risk losing their spot, and you'd think, well, it's just wrestling. Well, for some of us, this is our dream, so it's like, keep your mouth shut and you get to live your dream, or speak up when the game is over. I couldn't imagine what that feels like. I mean, but yeah, no, I have, luckily I slipped through the cracks here, because some of us do get lucky, and I've never been put in that situation. Mr. King?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of us, it kind of, and this is really situation with races in our current days, right? A lot of the situation is more nuanced. So I think, I mean, I'm coming up on 20 years. So when I was younger in the business, there wasn't so much that it was, okay, you know, you're black, so you can't necessarily have these opportunities, but there weren't so many spots. There was already a black dude in your spot. Chances are you would have to wait, or you'd have to kind of kick it to see what kind of spot opened up. So there was lots of that going on. Like, oh man, you know, Monty Brown's a heavyweight and Jay Lethal's in the X division, so maybe there's nothing for me at TNA, which is a real life conversation that I've had with myself. So you had to kind of almost ration it out, right? And see, okay, who's there, who's doing this, who's doing that. And this all kind of ties into the conversation I had with Vince Russo on his show a long time ago. And he asked this question of me, like, well, why do you think, there's a difference between African-American talent and white talent and the perception? And I looked at him, I said, because of guys like you, Vince, you write these things, and you have to understand where Triple H is allowed to be a three-dimensional character, right? Triple H can be a cerebral assassin, he can be the game, he can be all these other different things, but Ahmed Johnson's just got to be a big bully, or Farouk's got to be a black nationalist, or it's just recently where we're starting to evolve these black characters and particularly in that promotion, but we're starting to see more three-dimensional character development to where you can just get behind. This guy isn't just, money, yeah, shout out to Shad Gaspard, but, or doing just one stereotypical action. You're starting to see characters be able to have multiple motives. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is to go into what Shane said. When you think about what a champion holds, you think about these character attributes, and throughout wrestling, black characters of color, goes into Asians, goes into Latinos. They're only allowed to be one type of way, and the more you flesh characters out, that's the only way fans get behind us, is we're able to show the different sides of us versus just being a bad guy or being a big guy or whatever. The more versatile we are, the more appealing we are.
That's a great point, Kenny. And right now in Ring of Honor, we have 7 champions of color. And starts with the world champion, the television champion, the tag team champions, and the 6-man champions. It's not always been that way. Gresh, you have your first taste of gold with the Ring of Honor tag team titles, but you're one of the few internationally recognized world champions to be black when you held the CZW championship and numerous accolades. Despite that, you've had a long road in 13 countries by the age of 30. Have you ever felt, to go back to something that Kenny said, have you ever felt that you've had to wait for a spot to open up? Is there a category of black wrestlers that makes black wrestlers feel like if one leaves, there might be a chance to step in?
Now, I feel like that does exist. Coming up in wrestling, for me, I always heard about there's only so many spots for black guys. I heard that from people of all colors, actually. Personally, I never felt like I was put down or held back because of my color. I think my fight was more so me being smaller. Now, I could have been blinded by that because of the obvious stature thing here, me being 5'4", in a land of guys that are normally 5'8" and higher. So I always looked at that being the hurdle I had to get over. It wasn't until I felt like I did everything I could possibly do to, make a name for myself and then be as unique as I possibly can. And I tried to get to the point where I could have a good match with anyone, any size, whatever. And at that point, I had to go back to the drawing board and ask myself, what am I doing wrong? Is it something I'm not doing right? And the more people I spoke to about it and got advice from, I started to feel like my race was one of the factors that was holding me back from getting contracts. Because I've been wrestling for 15 years, and my first contract came in 2013. And I don't really feel any way about that now. I thank God that I am where I am now. But I really do feel like the lack of main characters, not just in professional wrestling, but in all of entertainment, is a huge issue with the subconscious mind of the people in the offices of wrestling companies that are booking. I am a firm believer in that Black men are categorized in a certain way when it comes to movies. Like just in the last couple of years that we started getting more strong Black roles in movies. But in the past, if you think about horror movies, how often do Black men survive, or Black people in general survive in horror movies? So you have to ask yourself that. So subconsciously, when we see a new horror movie come out, we know that that character is what ultimately going to die. That's what we expect. So I think that kind of transcends into professional wrestling as well. And I think the only way to really start coming out of that, and I'm not sure if you guys know of anyone in the offices of color. I believe maybe D'Lo Brown is in TNA right now, but we need more people of color to start changing the narrative in these different wrestling companies. We need representation in the booking offices and committees and meetings. For me, I think that's going to help move into a more positive direction where we can start seeing the changes that we want to see in the industry.
You brought up a lot of great points, Gresh. I want to double click on a couple of them. Maybe just by show of hands, this was a very popular question among our fans that wrote in. Did any of you have to feel like you had to work harder because of the color of your skin to get your spot? Okay, that's kind of a layup. That's the question I anticipated.
Yeah.
That's just the thing. Sorry, I'm pretty sure we're all going to say the same thing. That's just the thing that young Black kids are told from a very, very young age, that, hey, listen, in this world, you have to work twice as hard just to start from go. And if you really want to win, you might have to work 3 and 4 times as hard. But so, that's just kind of, y'all reach for the buzzer, right? Because it's something that, it's in our DNA. As a young Black child, you're ingrained. That's something that's ingrained in you.
And not only ingrained in you, but there are real situations that I feel, even in our sport, to where the Black athlete has to work for his spot. When you can hire another athlete, and because of his look, he's like, man, this guy has the look and the talk. Let's put a rocket behind him, and let's give him opportunities, and let's put him in this position to be this, and let's put him in this position to be that. When someone that looks like us, they have to literally win the fans to where you become undeniable when you come out, to where they're like, okay, now let's do something with this guy. It's not like, oh, let's look at this guy and let's see what we can do with him. Let's put him in this situation and let's put him in that situation. We're putting situations to where, okay, put him out there. Let's see what happens. If the crowd draws to him, we'll give him another chance. The crowd draws to him, we'll give him another chance. But we're never putting situations where we're like, man, this guy has a nice look. I like the way he talks. Let's put the rocket behind him and see what happens. It's always, we've put the attention on ourselves, and now you have to do something with us. Type thing. And that's the way I feel like it's been in this sport a lot. And I've been in conversations to where I've been talking to promoters or whatever, and just a random conversation, they'd be like, oh man, yeah, we hired so-and-so, man. He just looks like an angel, or he has looked like so-and-so. And I just know he's going to get a lot of attention. He's going to get a lot of that or whatever. And you look at a lot of their matches, and not saying anybody is bad, but there are a lot of people that aren't great, that might have one thing that's good for them, might be their mouthpiece. You look at a lot of the great wrestlers today, like, you can name some Hulk Hogan's and all this stuff. They weren't phenomenal wrestlers. They were good mouthpieces. But we were told to hush our mouths. And I can tell you a story when I was little, and I don't want to talk too long. But when I was little, I remember watching Dusty Rhodes. And he was amazing to me because I could relate to him. He walked like me. He talked like me. He moved like me. And as a kid, I was like, man, I want to be just like Dusty Rhodes. And when I got into wrestling, man, I walked and I talked and I did all the movements and I did all this, not like Dusty Rhodes, but like me, and it was like, oh, you need to calm that down. You need to tone that down, you tone this down or whatever. And I started seeing other people that don't look like me doing the exact same thing. And I'm like, hold on a second. You don't want me to be me. but you don't mind if somebody else imitates me. You know, somebody else imitates me very good, you push them to the moon. But if I'm me, I'm offensive. You know, and that's a real thing, to where as a black athlete, you're forced not only to be not who you are, but find someone else to be that you can get over yourself.
And that leads to the next part of the hard work, which is not all of our hard work is done in the ring. A lot of it is done curbing our attitude if we see those type of things happening. And I've seen more so back in the day, not so much now, but I've seen a lot of times where, you know, an African-American wrestler will say something that rubs people the wrong way, and they've got this stink on them or this stigma. But yet other people do it, and it's easier for them to shake it off. But it kind of sticks as a stain, and I've seen it so many times. And I wish I could go back in time and help or something. But at the time when I was seeing this, that I was powerless. But how is it fair, or was it fair that, you know, if that guy had done the same thing or said the same thing that he said, you probably would have forgave him maybe next month. He would have been on your shows, but because he said it, you never booked him again. And now he's got this stain on him, and now it's harder for him to get booked. Why? Because he's black and he said something you didn't like. But I mean, I've heard worse than that from other people. So it's a hard, and that's been something that's, you know, I've worked tremendously hard on, because it's so much hard work working on your in-ring ability, and it's even harder for some people to work on that the part of you that needs to socialize and make sure that you just, man, I don't want to say the wrong words here, but you gotta ultimately just gotta be the best person you possibly can, no matter what you're seeing or what you're feeling, because for an African American, it's so easy to develop this stigma or this stain. That guy's hard to deal with, or that guy's an asshole. So yeah, it's a lot of hard work.
And you know what, Jay, to piggyback off of that point, I've had a few people recently tell me, you know, in different avenues, Shane, you're hard to work with, or this is my opinion. And people that know me, you know, I'm the easiest person in the world to work with ever. You know what I mean? But more so, what I'm learning that is when people say you're hard to work with, that means you're hard to take advantage of. You know what I mean? And so for a lot of us who choose to speak out about these things, the truth of the matter is that a lot of us are just seen as guests in this sport, even in the country. Like, hey, we've allowed you to do this, so you should feel grateful for any success that we've allowed you to have. Forget the fact that we've, you know, honed and developed a skill in our craft for decades now, you know, and this is not just wrestling, but any sport. When you listen to people, they go, oh, well, he made this, so how can there be racism? Just because you have success doesn't mean that you still didn't have to go through everything else. It doesn't mean other people aren't going through it. You just happen to be in a position to be so skilled that people had to do something with you. You know, when you're talking about Jay, he's one of the very best wrestlers in the world. When you're talking about, you know, different artists or other sports figures, you're talking about superheroes, people that are well past the average individual in talent, and they're able to overcome these things and have that resilience. But that's why we use the platforms and use our voices that we have, because we're not the only ones that are affected. And there are millions of other people who don't have these platforms to say what's going on. And that's, you know, and that's why we speak out about these things, you know, and that's why we address them. Because at least for me, and I can only speak for me, if I have that conversation, it may be tough for some people, but maybe that prevents the next person after me from having to have the same conversation. So I'm willing to take those slings and arrows to be able to kind of keep that door open, or maybe open it up a little bit more for the guy coming after me.
Shane, I want to commend you too. You're somebody that's always been kind of a sounding board to ensure the presentation of Black athletes in Ring of Honor is, not only appropriate but also befitting of the roles that you're in. And I think that there's something applaudable, and I don't know if it's the movement. Speaking from my perspective, it's been easier for allies to speak out who aren't Black in America right now because of the courage of folks that have spoken out. And it's really refreshing to see. And I think it's hopefully it's helping people have more difficult conversations than they would before. And hopefully, things like this, you're seeing some of the stars of Ring of Honor discuss these major topics. I hope that leads to some understanding. We do have quite a few more questions. We're going to try and get to all of them. I had one DM to me in private. I'd like to read it now. And this goes back to the idea that, that Gresham that you brought up and Caprice you brought up about, Black athletes, despite having all the attributes, may not be considered for those top roles. I think of Bearcat Wright. I think of Junkyard Dog. I think of Thunderbolt Patterson, men that should have been on national television holding world championships that never got to that spot, despite being wildly popular. But we have an athlete like that in Ring of Honor, and his name is Cheeseburger. It's no secret that Cheeseburger has sold the most T-shirts on any ROH New Japan tour when we are in Japan. But the question is, Cheeseburger is one of the most popular wrestlers in Ring of Honor. Is there ever a fear that his support is at the expense of him being a small Black man, and that fans may be laughing at him rather than with him? Similarly, how do you feel about wrestlers like Freight Train and Nasty Leroy? And where's the line between support and laughter? Do you feel any of these acts can go too far in portraying both Black men and women as strong athletes? And is there room for comedy? And how delicate is that line to walk?
I would say, and I would try to keep mine short and sweet. I'll first of all say that Cheeseburger is a phenomenal athlete, and he is a smaller guy and all, but Cheeseburger knows the business and he actually teaches it well. With his stature and all that, there's a character that he plays that he is part of. He knows that he is the underdog. There is a part where it's like, some of that stuff could be true, but he knows where he is now. But Cheeseburger could turn that around anytime, So I feel, even with Freight Train, I'm great friends with Freight Train. He calls me at least every 2 weeks just to say, hey, Caprice, or whatever like that. That's the type of person he is. I believe as long as the athlete is in on the joke, it's cool. As long as the athlete is aware of what's going on, it's cool. And then that's all I'll say about that. I give other people time to talk.
I just make it short and sweet. I think that when you look at a guy like Cheeseburger, a guy like Freight Train, these guys are characters. They're not caricatures. Mm-hmm. So, Cheeseburger is an everyman. Everybody can get behind the underdog, the little guy who's got to stand up to the big bully. And that's one of the reasons why Cheeseburger is so popular, is because he's a character. He is someone that if you're white, Black, whatever, Asian, so you can look at yourself and say, okay, I can get behind Cheeseburger. And you're not thinking about Cheeseburger as a 140-pound Black man, because that's not what he's representing. That's not what he's portraying. He's just portraying that every man that, push too far, no matter how big you are, everybody's got a tiger in him, and that's Cheeseburger.
Thank you very much. And we have another great question here, and this goes back to something that Jay, you had mentioned. I'm going to tie this back together, and anyone can answer this. What does the statement mean to you? When you know better, you need to do better. And this is something that I've struggled with. I've been an ally in private, and an advocate for Caprice, being my broadcast partner. That's something that's not falling on deaf ears. We feel supported, but there are times that maybe in public we could do better, or maybe confronting situations like Jay mentioned, maybe thinking back in our minds when we learned something wasn't kosher that happened, wishing we could turn back the hands of time. Does that statement ring true to anybody, or how does that statement land with folks? When you know better, you need to do better. And that was a question submitted anonymously through our Google form.
I mean, I'll take this one first if you guys don't mind. That hits home for me because especially like I'm a big advocate of learning history and real history, not just the indoctrinated Disneyland version that we're given in school. Like actually learning history and making my decisions and my choices based off of that. And there's so much misinformation in the world and so much that people have just been ingrained with lies that they feel is the truth. So if you give people real information, there's a thing that's called cognitive dissonance, right? And that's their brain shutting out the reality of what you just told them and doubling down on what they had been led to believe, right? So the statement, when you know better, you do better, is supposed to be a push in the right direction of, hey, once you're given new information, you then now have a choice on how you want to go about acting upon that information. You can continue to do the same things that you've been doing, now knowing that those are incorrect. Or you can adjust your thinking, you can adjust your behavior to go along with the new information that you're given, right? And so the hope is that people can get the information that we are giving them, but not only relying on that, but going out and finding out information on your own and learning that and wanting to be that change that you're learning about. Or, you can just continue and wait for the same things to happen, and the same cycles are going to repeat themselves, but then you can't ask yourself why, because you'd be why.
Thank you, Shane. You brought up something too about obtaining new information, and there are individuals, perhaps rightly so, critical of organizations for seemingly commercializing the Black Lives Matter movement and picking now as a time to hop on board. Particularly, this roundtable was met with some applause that the issue is being addressed, but there was other folks that rightly pointed out that this is the first time Ring of Honor has addressed Black Lives Matter in a meaningful way. Do you see any dissonance there? And I'll use the example of the Washington, D.C. football team. It seems like money talks. Their sponsors are pulling out of their field naming rights. There are organizations not selling their merchandise with the ask that the team changes their name. Do you think that efforts like these are valuable? Do you think that they are genuine? And are there any ways to determine, as somebody who lives and breathes this every day, just how genuine these efforts may be?
Rick Abani, I'm going to give you a story. And the story a lot of people have probably heard was there was a rich man lived beside a poor lady. And the poor lady would go outside every day and say, "Lord, I'm hungry. Please buy me something to eat." The rich man would look at her and laugh. And every day she would stand out there and say, "Lord, I'm so hungry. Please buy me something to eat." She'd do this for days and days. And finally, the rich man said, "You know what? I'm going to play a joke on her. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy this lady all the groceries she wants to. And I'm going to put it on her porch. And I'm going to see what she says when she sees these groceries." So he went and bought the groceries. He put on her porch, didn't let her see it. And then she comes out on the porch and she sees all these groceries there. And she was like, "Thank you, Jesus. You heard my prayers. Thank you so much. I thank you for hearing this. Thank you, Lord." And the rich guy comes from behind the bush. He's like, "God didn't buy that for you. I bought it for you. I'm the one that did that." And then she said, "Lord, thank you. You chose the devil to bless me. You let the devil do it." And so I say that to say this. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. And it's not our job to say whether it's real or not. Is it lucrative? You just explain how lucrative it is for people that are getting behind it or whatever like that. The thing is what happens next. There are a lot of people that are making moves and I believe every time something like this happens, there are moves forward. So we can't look at what's genuine and what's disingenuine if there being moves that are made forward. Jesus was the same way. I'm a preacher. I can't help but use the Bible and the stuff. that are used, but there were people that came to him and said, hey, there are people talking about you, but we don't know them. He said, but the word is being spread, you know, and this is good news, man. It's good things that are happening. And so I, for one, would say, whether it's disingenuous or not, moves are being made. And I think people move more when money is being made.
There's a popular phrase that said, and it rings true as to how change has come about in this nation. And for any group, change has either come about through loss of income or loss of life. There is no other way. And anything short, you know what I mean, of that, which is a huge extreme that nobody wants, like the loss of income motivates people more. So instead of just saying, hey, well, we agree, or hey, this, once you start taking money out of people's pockets, then all of a sudden it becomes a very real thing. Because now that situation affects them directly. It's not something that's happening to someone else far away. That's affecting them. That's in their pocket. That's affecting their families. So once you start to see those buttons being pushed, you tend to get change. And I think I'm all for it. And I think that's what needs to happen when people, you know, are in these spots. You know, they're not changing things. They're not doing things. They're not going about things, you know, the way, whether it be the name change or other factors. Like that's how you have to show that change. But on the flip side as well, it's also how you inspire change by showing support for your favorite athletes or your favorite wrestlers, whoever. We have to make them undeniable. We have to, like Capri said, we have to be making sure that their shirts are the ones flying off of merch racks. We have to make sure that when people show up with tickets, that's what they're wearing, that they're going up, letting people know we came here to support so-and-so. You know what I mean? Because that's going to be what opens people's eyes to go, hey. And unfortunately, maybe some people only get on board because they can profit from it, but they're on board nonetheless. So, yeah, I mean, that nails it right there. Like loss of income inspires change because it makes everybody involved in the situation.
Oh, those are some great points, and thank you, Caprice and Shane. This will be our last question, and I saved this one for last. Shane, you teed me up for it. We couldn't have planned this any better. We have a question that came in through our Google form, and the question is, thoughts on this statement? To get rid of racism, it's not enough to just acknowledge it. Action must be done. And our questioner wants to know what concrete actions, little or big, can you do given your platform, and what can actions, little or big, what can fans do who want to be allies and support this movement? Caprice, I see your hand up.
Is there anybody else that wanted to speak on this? Because I know I've talked a lot.
I'm gonna take one quick thing real quick, okay. and then it's all yours.
Yeah.
To dispel a lot of BS, like, and this is just for me, but we don't care about painting words on the street. I don't care about syrup bottles. I don't care about rice containers. I don't care about any of that. Like, I don't care. What these issues are, you know, this is about redlining, you know, not letting people own homes that establish, you know, which is the foundation for building generational wealth that ends cycles of poverty, that end in lower crime rates to keep people out of jail. This is about ending police brutality with better training, and not only that, but ending statutes like with qualified immunity and things of that sort that are get out of jail free cards. This is about taking actual steps. This is about legislation and actually putting things in place that will balance the tables a bit and make things truly equal, and we can actually live up to you know, the creed that we tout as a nation. That's what this is about. All the petty stuff, all the small stuff, okay, cool, all that's great, but this needs to be about fixing the tangible things that will make a difference in people's lives, that will make a difference in these communities. And And so for me, for those wondering how to help, you can talk to people that you know, have these uncomfortable conversations, but also research on how to get involved with politics, your local people, governors, all that, on how we take the steps to end those programs and really find a way to get justice, for everybody. That's how we move forward, and that's how we end this.
I agree 1,000% what Shane said, and I would also say Ian can definitely speak on this. Is speaking out when you see something not wrong, and not just waiting to see what happens. I've had personal conversations with Rick Abani, and he said some things to me that let me know that there's some things that just aren't going to go down around him, and I believe if more people had that mentality to where if they see something wrong, they say something, and not only just with black and white people, but even on the police force. I've seen situations to where even with George Floyd, and I hate bringing that up because there are millions of cases that don't even make TV that just go pushed under the rug. However, I will say I saw the George Floyd thing, and I saw his knee, the police officer that had his knee on his neck all the time. And then I saw a very similar video where another police officer had a knee on the guy's neck, and the guy was like, "I can't breathe." And the police officer working with him took the one police officer's knee and just slid it over. Just like that, he checked his own partner. I saw where police check each other. And I believe even if that happens in the police department, to where, you can say, hey man, you kind of going overboard there, or they check each other. I think if we get into a system to where we're not afraid to say something, and also not afraid to educate yourself on something that you might not be a part of. I've told a lot of my friends, watch the 13th on Netflix. You like to watch Netflix. The 13th is a tremendous documentary on systemic racism that you could educate yourself on, and that you would learn a lot from. You can watch that in the comfort of your own home. Have conversations, have uncomfortable conversations with friends, and be open-minded. I've talked to people that are open-minded, and I've talked to people that, like Shane said, already know what they think about before they have the conversation, and they just want to hear you to say it and say, well, I grew up poor too. Well, I'll say this. There's a difference between growing up poor and growing up with a poor mentality. And growing up wanting to change your mentality, there's nothing to do about it. You can come. Somebody told me, said, man, my great grandfather moved to this country. He didn't have a penny on him, and all he knew is that he was a carpenter. He knew who he was. Like I say, well, my great grand ancestors came here, and he was told what to do. It didn't matter what he did when he came here. And guess what? I have no idea who he is, because I don't know who my great grandfather is. My heritage doesn't go back that far. And so there are a lot of disadvantages that we have that aren't even thought about, and so I think it starts with educating yourself. I told my son, he was like, well, what can we do about this? I said, what you can do is you can become educated. If it hurts you that bad, become a politician, learn the law, make a difference to where you can make an impact. For me, it starts in my community. For me, it's helping. I become a mentor. I'm a mentor now. I help the youth, and I help other adults and people now. I may not be able to be president, but I can make an impact where I am.
I'd like to hop in. I think what's really important is just like Chris was saying, education. It's having the uncomfortable conversations. There's so much. We have to stop the flow of poor information that's circulating. One of the things that you hear all the time is, slavery was, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. Why are people bringing it up now? What does it have to do? But they don't realize that it was legal to discriminate against black people until 1968. Jim Crow was a real thing and everybody's got grandparents or parents that was born in 1968. So when you look at things in relative terms, this is not that long ago that it was legal for these things to happen. You excuse me, when you look at how much bad information is coming out. The people think that the term Black Lives Matter is a hate slogan, and people do so much they can to hijack the narrative of these things. And so, and what happens is we have such a small attention span as a nation, where people that are already on the fence about kind of wanting to listen to these things and maybe open up to them. Once there's too much things, there's rioting, there's this or that, then they want to shut it down and pay attention to those things and close down the valve, and that's all by design. So we have to, realize that there's people, that there are agents that don't want these conversations to be had. There's people and there's organizations, instruments, whatever you want to call them, that want, that don't want people to come to the realization that what people want isn't really that far off, but our information and where we're getting our true north and our value system can get skewered just by what we have coming in. So, what you can do is, if you hear somebody, your family members especially, you know what I mean? Here's somebody saying something that not to be factually true about the Black Lives Matter movement, or learn about Martin Luther King, right? Don't use Martin Luther King as your racial teddy bear and forget that, and stop at the I have a dream speech. Go read letters from a Birmingham jail. Read some of these things that in his later life, got to really see what Martin Luther King was really dealing with under the pressures of 1968 America. And then you'll really start to understand why these things continue to pop up every couple of years, because, you can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You have to there's certain techniques that a surgeon has to do. You have to remove the bullet. You have to remove the infection. You have to treat what's actually happening so that the wound can close and that person going to be healthy. And what we've been doing is we've been treating this gaping wound in our nation as though it was a paper cut. And, we think that the Black national anthem at NFL games, or poor Aunt Jemima, is going to fix these things when they just distract us from the issues at hand. So just don't get distracted. Ask questions. Daniel Bryan, shout out to Daniel Bryan, I think had one of the most insightful things to say. He said, your Black friends are not Google. If you have a question about this stuff, take it upon yourself to find out the answers. Take it upon yourself to really dig deep and find out about this stuff, because we got people in the highest positions of this country spouting absolute pure nonsense. And if you're not willing to do your due diligence, it's easy to get caught up.
And for some people, it's uncomfortable. And I don't hold anything against them. I'm not angry at them or upset at them that this kind of thing and these kind of talks make them uncomfortable. But I think with our platforms, we can just make sure that the movement doesn't die. We can keep playing that song that gets stuck in your head, because you play that song once, stuck in your head for a few days, and then it'll disappear. But we got to make sure that song doesn't disappear, and make these uncomfortable situations, these uncomfortable talks, comfortable. And like I said, I don't hold it against anybody who is uncomfortable about these things. It's not your fault that you're uncomfortable about it, but we need to make those uncomfortable things comfortable so that change can happen.
Gentlemen, I appreciate all of your candid thoughts, opinions, emotions, the recalling some uncomfortable times for yourselves in both wrestling and in life. And hopefully we can continue this conversation. This will not end here. You can use the hashtag ROH Roundtable to continue to interact and talk about this. And please tag at Caprice Coleman. Please tag Jonathan Gresham, Jay Lethal, Shane Taylor, Kenny King, myself. We want this conversation to continue. It's something that should not end and will not end. And we will continue to celebrate this here at Ring of Honor. This was the first of many of ROH Roundtables that we will provide to you here on our YouTube channel. Please continue to check us out at Ring of Honor on Twitter and on Facebook, as well as Instagram. We will provide updates on when the upcoming roundtables will take place and their topics. We hope to engage in more enlightening conversations that will challenge your current perspectives. So for Caprice Coleman, for Shane Taylor, Jonathan Gresham, Jay Lethal, Kenny King, I'm Ian Riccaboni. Happy wrestling, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the very first ROH Roundtable.